Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Future of the Yoga Teacher, a five-part panel series presented by Embodied Philosophy. I'm Jacob Kyle, and I am the facilitator or moderator for these panels. But before we start the panel today, I just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about Embodied Philosophy for those of you who are new to our work. Embodied Philosophy is an online educational platform and community for Eastern philosophies and practices. We publish a range of content. We have our podcast Chitheads, in which I interview leaders, scholars, and teachers from the Eastern philosophy community. We present online courses, conferences, and seminars, all of which you can learn about on our website at embodiedphilosophy.com. Two courses are launching next month, one on the philosophy and iconography of yoginis, and one on Tibetan Buddhism. And we also are relaunching all of our writings as a monthly online journal called Tarka, which officially launches this Friday along with a new incarnation of our website. We also have a private Facebook group for our community called Embodied Philosophy Forum. We also have a weekly e-zine that has also been re-envisioned and will launch this Friday along with the new website. So there are many ways that you can learn it with us and get involved. So if any of that piques your interest, please check out our work on the website. Tomorrow, let me just transition to this image here. Tomorrow we have a talk happening as a part of our Yoga Teacher Advanced Studies seminar, which may be of interest to you. So tomorrow, Thursday, July 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Isa Gucciardi will be giving a talk titled Depth Hypnosis, Perspectives on Trauma for Yoga Teachers. You have to be a student of the seminar in order to watch that talk. So if you're interested in the talk or the seminar in general, just go to embodiedphilosophy.com/yoga seminar. Okay, so let's get to the panel. So the Future of the Yoga Teacher is a five-part panel series, and our mission with these conversations is to highlight 5 different ways that yoga teachers are taking their teaching practice beyond the fitness studio model and into domains of expertise and specialization that are changing lives both individually and collectively. Our hope is that these conversations will inspire existing and future yoga teachers to think outside the 200-hour TT box and take action to use their teaching as a tool of transformation on a variety of levels. So please, those of you who are with us here live, I encourage all of you to ask any questions you have in the comments, even as they come up, and I'll moderate those questions towards the end of our conversation with Ali and Scott. At the end of our session, which will be about 45 minutes to an hour, we'll talk, and then after that, we'll open it up to questions. So if you have questions, like I said, just leave them in the comments, and I will look at them towards the end of our chat. So this week, we're looking at healing and what it means to be a yoga teacher and a healer. So here with me live today to explore this topic are Ali Bogard and Scott Lyons. And now you can see their beautiful headshots here. So Ali Bogard is a New York City-based yoga and meditation teacher. Her teaching style is detailed as well as exploratory in physical alignment and subtle body awareness. As teacher and co-founder of Gayatri Yoga Training Program, Ali has taught 200 and 500-hour teacher training programs, alignment immersions, and teacher mentorship programs since 2003, both nationally and internationally. She is also the co-creator of Sound Mind Meditation, which combines visualization and meditation with the science of sound therapy. Dr. Scott Lyons is a clinical psychologist and mind-body medicine practitioner who specializes in therapies for infants, youth, and adults, which is pretty much everybody. He is a certified body-mind centering teacher and practitioner, craniosacral therapist, visceral manipulation therapist, neurodevelopmental therapist, infant developmental movement educator, registered movement therapist and educator, trauma therapist, somatic experiencing practitioner, Thai massage practitioner, clinical hypnotherapist, mindfulness-based executive coach, focusing practitioner, experiential anatomy, developmental movement, and yoga practitioner, and a 500-hour registered yoga teacher. Additionally, he holds a BFA in theater psychology, MFA in dance choreography, MS in clinical psychology, and a PhD in clinical psychology and mind-body medicine. And he's currently completing his studies to become a doctor of osteopathy. Is that how you pronounce that? And then, Scott is the co-creator of Embodied Flow Yoga with Tara Judell. He was an adjunct at New York University from 2007 to 2010, where he co-taught the Viewpoint Studio with Mary Overly. As an artist, Scott's work has been performed at BAM, Symphony Space, Dance New Amsterdam, as well as theaters around the United States and Europe. So with that, I'd like to welcome my guests. Let me just make sure that you can hear them and move out of this image here. Hello, Ali and Scott. How are you?
Hey. Hi, Jacob.
Thanks so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to chat with you today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, which I feel will be a really interesting one and bring up a lot of kind of important topics that I think present themselves to us as yoga teachers. So, since this is the topic of healing, I would love to just first, be very basic about it and ask the question to both of you individually. What is healing, according to you? And based on that definition of healing, do you consider yourself a healer? So why don't we start with Scott?
Sure. I think it's helpful to look at sort of one of the classical definitions of healing, or to heal, which means basically to make whole. And that is one perspective that, I certainly was educated in and grew up in, which differs from my own experience and opinion, that in my perspective, that we are all already whole, and that there are simply obstructions or misalignments, sort of dust covering the mirror to see that and to feel that experience of wholeness. And so healing is the process of reconnecting, of removing, transmuting those obstructions back into that experience of wholeness. And do I consider myself a healer? I do not. The word is really interesting, and I have been sort of playing with that for years now, whether I would, if someone calls me a healer, if that feels like a truism or if it feels right. And it doesn't, in the sense that, like if we think of a dancer, it denotes, that they are the one doing the dancing. And in the same with healing, if I was the healer, it would denote that I'm the one doing the healing, when really it's each individual doing their own process of healing. In this more holistic approach to what is healing, it's my belief that we all have our own self-writing response towards health, back towards that state of wholeness. And so I believe that I wouldn't call myself a healer. I would call myself maybe a facilitator supporting someone's own process of healing.
Right. So to get sort of further about what you mean, what I hear you saying is that the idea that you are a healer in this sort of traditional healer-healed kind of dualism implies that, that there's somehow that healing has to be given by someone outside you. Whereas I feel like what you're saying is that you see yourself as a facilitator, and actually the healer is the person who's doing the healing for themselves. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, Ali, what do you think about that same question? Like, what is healing from your perspective, and do you consider yourself a healer?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Scott more. And I think this is such an important conversation for the practice and the industry of where we are now, because I can speak on my own journey and my own practice. I was coming at so many of my practices in my earlier life from this place where I was convinced of how broken I was. Mm-hmm. And so then I would always seek for teachers and teachings and practical applications to just heal this place inside of me that was never going to be touched by anything. And so when Scott alludes to, we're not the doer, we're being done, and that we are these vessels or these channels for this inherent energy that already exists to be more opened, I would consider myself not a healer, but I've definitely built that archetype for myself inside of myself, so that it's me with me. And any of my teaching or any of my work I'm so uninterested in what I can be for or do for another, but just how we can relate and hold the space for each other to remember who we are. Mm-hmm. Because I can think back to the times when I was convinced of my brokenness and so needed the practice to help me and fix me. I was obsessed with giving my power away to other people. And I think especially with, the demographic of yoga teachers in the level of society and education that we come into, and I think we'll talk about it in this podcast, we're not trained enough to even hold that seat with good authority. And so I think it's so important to then remind each other that we are our own archetypical healer, and we can bear good witness, and we can be good relationship and be good counsel, but not to take away or give away power for you did this to me for me. It feels too agentless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. So do you think that kind of dynamic of seeking healing outside oneself is playing into a lot of the situations of kind of teacher-student abuse that we're seeing? How do you feel like this conversation connects to that sort of, phenomenon that we're seeing in our communities?
I think it's one aspect of it. I think it's a faction of it. I think it is a very interesting role, the role of a yoga teacher, and many other roles have this. I'm not going to, just because we're talking about a yoga teacher, I'll speak in this context, but it's such a stage where projection is so easily played out. That person must have it all together, and the relationships must be so refined, and they must have such a good relationship to the creator. And so I think it's a good profession to get a lot of projection. and then what I've seen of myself and people that have taught for a long time, it's easy to start to believe that projection.
Yeah.
I'm like, I must have it so together. And then I look at my own personal life, and I'm out of an integrity, and my relationships were a mess. So that projection, it was helpful for me to see it's such a dangerous place to balance on a pedestal. I want my feet on the ground, And so I think what we see about what's been happening with a lot of hierarchy in student-teacher roles is just a field of not enough understanding about base humanity and what a teacher is going through.
Right. Wow, good answer. So, I mean, I think we already know the answer to this question now, but just to kind of ask it more pointedly, is the role of the yoga teacher the role of a healer? Like, how would you answer that question, since so many yoga teachers would consider themselves healers? I guess let's go back to Scott for that one.
So, I mean, I would say it's up to the individual how they want to identify themselves in that role. Again, I think that the job of the yoga teacher is to create a sort of social, ecological an environment in which healing can take place. Mm-hmm. So, the sense of presence, the holding space, and we can deconstruct that another time. But the capacity to be in relationship sets a tone in the environment to which healing can take place. It's an opportunity to be a mirror to help support other people to reflect back inward. And as Ali was saying, the yoga classroom is an opportunity for people to go from their busy day to starting to turn inward. And the moment we start to turn inward, the moment we start to slow down, we have an opportunity to acknowledge and meet what's here, which is the beginning of any process of healing. And, just to come back to the first question a little bit, even from a medical perspective, let's say there's a fracture in a bone and there's a surgery and a plate that helps put the bone back in sort of some type of alignment, that the healing still belongs to that individual for that mending to happen. And, I think something when we look at healing is that it is, or we can begin to ask, is it something objective? Is it something that has quantifiable evidence as this is when someone is, quote unquote, healed? Or is it a subjective experience, a felt experience of when I have arrived in that healing?
Mm-hmm. Ali, same question.
Yeah, I love that the healing not only belongs to the self, it belongs to just the inherent wisdom of the body. And if a teacher is somebody that holds a key to the door we most need to get in that moment, they're not the entire castle that we enter, but they're a key holder, then I want to say this carefully, because we are such relational beings and we're empathic beings, and we need each other to bear witness and to see our blind spots. And so when I say this, I want to lead into it with that, where I definitely believe yoga teachers are healers from the place that they are so committed to healing themselves and healing the separation and the illusion and the doubt inside of themselves. And I can say, in my lineage, in my family, in my heart, in my body, I've been such a receiver of the healing practice of, myself and my mind and my spirit. And whatever I have done, that I'm so happy to share and offer it, but as a relationship, not as a hierarchy of role, if that makes sense.
So let me clarify what you're saying. So are you saying that a yoga teacher is a healer in the sense that they are committed to the process of healing themselves, and less that they're a healer of their students? Is that sort of what you mean?
It is. I think a teacher is somebody that is a very committed student that then goes and shares what they've received, saying, if it's helped me, may it help you. If it's lifted me, may it lift you. And knowing that everybody is on their own journey to themselves. And so I can say that I'm definitely a healer of myself and my story and my lies and my illusions. And that's just on me. And I'm in relationship with others. So I think a teacher is a very committed student that expresses themselves through word and through teaching and through service.
I think that's really beautiful.
It's extraordinarily healing practice. We all know that. It's why we've given our lives to it.
Yeah.
Scott, did you want to reflect on that?
I just think that's a really beautiful response and humble, which, I really appreciate that I think the role of us doing our own work is also transmitted through the space, that in our own process of healing and that post-traumatic growth, the resilience that extends because we are in our own process of finding the obstructions, removing them, transmuting them back to our own wholeness, that also is one of the things that is present in the class, which I believe helps someone go through their own process that much more safely.
So I want to have or ask a question that's more, I guess, historical, which is where does this idea of the yoga teacher being a healer come from? Because we could make the historical argument that at least in certain historical periods, the emphasis was much more on notions of spiritual liberation, which didn't necessarily, you could then of course say that spiritual liberation is inherently a healing process, but in some instances, yogis were in very ascetic, were practicing ascetic practices that we wouldn't associate with the process of healing, but they were done in the service of some kind of, spiritual transcendence. So, at least if we look back at the majority of yoga's history, it seems like this was more of the emphasis, and then, healing seemed to be a secondary thing. But now I feel like in the contemporary context, right, we're seeing the yoga teacher really be presented much more as a kind of healer, as a, wellness practitioner. So, from your perspective, where do you see this kind of role of the yoga teacher as healer kind of entering the scene from your perspective?
I think Ali really named an important piece, which is the projection, that as people start to have their own experiences, it's easy to say, oh, that belonged or that happened because of the person who was in front of me, thus they are the healer. And, I make a joke often in trainings that I'm kind of shocked of when did the yoga teacher become the nutritionist, the physical therapist, the DJ, the hairstylist, the fashionista, where all of a sudden there became all of these sort of projection of roles and expectations of that this person should do and have. And so part of what I see is the sort of pressure perhaps and the projection perhaps building up to assume to take on more roles, including that of the healer. And I was talking earlier with a colleague, a friend of mine, and she mentioned that, Iyengar in the 60s was talking about certain practices that were geared towards healing, menstrual cramps or headaches or migraines. I remember doing that in my teens, certain practices from his books to do just that. So I don't think it's just in the last, popularization period that started to be taken in, but I do think that's certainly a factor.
Ellie, what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm going to start with the pronoun we, and I don't mean this offensively or broadly, but I'm just going to say we. We're obsessed with needing somebody who knows. We're obsessed with knowing the answer. For a lot of our culture, to be in the I don't know state is as close to worthlessness and death as it comes. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I'm lost. And so as soon as we see somebody that might have a map in the forest and a light in the darkness and, again, a key to the door, if they have it, we want it, because we are such a knowing, obsessed culture. I need somebody that knows the answer. And I think the discomfort with the I don't know-ness of life is so important, because to me, that's where we build a relationship to the mystery and to faith. And faith and doubt are two sides of a coin they necessitate each other. But I think what's happened with the yoga teacher, like, listen, I really trust the practice. I trust the way that it evolves through iterations. And there was a time when it was actually expressed more through older males who had a one-on-one teacher who could be trained for 70 years plus and then go spread that knowledge. But then we have, a lot of teacher trainings where it's younger women starting to get involved with underdeveloped nervous systems that don't know how to process their own trauma and the projection of other people's. And so then they get stuck in a very particular place of needing to know depending on their lifestyle and their money. And so then they have to almost allude to or pretend to know, because now their lifestyle is dependent on their practice. And everywhere that it got really dark in my life is where I would feel like, if I don't know the answer, if I can't be the DJ and the hairstylist and the shaman and the teacher here, how am I going to pay rent? And that's just like a super honest answer to it. Of being a teacher for 14 years, at a very young age I began. And so I think the obsession goes both ways. It's the student to the teacher, and then the teacher's fear of saying, like, I don't know the answer. Let me refer you to somebody who trained with that. And it's really tied into lifestyle and to just taking care of oneself.
Wow, that's a really good answer. And it actually segues really nicely into the next question that I have, which is, what are some of the practical issues that arise when a student approaches their yoga teacher as if they have all the answers? And I think you've kind of touched on them a little bit, but are there any other ones that you want to reflect on, Allie?
The ability to listen, like, I'm just going to be super personal here in the way that I communicate it, where because a lot of my livelihood, actually my entire adult livelihood, was dependent on the money I made from teaching. If I was going through a breakup or a death in the family, or I just was in a mode of self-hatred, it didn't matter. I still had to show up. And the times where I wished, and I've ran teacher trainings long enough and honestly enough to say, I do wish I would have given myself time not teaching, where I got to just be in the I don't know of the practice, so that I could let the practice take me and not the way I needed to make my livelihood. And I think that's applicable to people even that aren't teaching for their livelihood, but feel like you have to hold a certain level of attainment or awakening to hold that seat. But honestly, the more I've fallen in love with myself and I'm just right with my darkness and right with my brokenness, I'm such a better teacher, because I got no show now. But when I was a kiddo, I was trying to perform.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of the hardship, and no healing gets done for me in judgment and performance, but just to say, like, this has helped me, it might help you. This is what's true for me, it might help you. We're in it together, and let's keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that performance thing is a very like common refrain because and I mean we see it just with how many actors and ex-performers end up as yoga teachers sort of as a a last ditch attempt to perform. uh, and and that I mean there's nothing wrong with that, but I mean it just sort of I think it does kind of I mean teaching yoga is a sort of kind of stage, and it's hard to be totally transparent and humble and vulnerable, when you're in that place of teaching. So, Scott, what do you think with that question regarding, what are the issues that arise when we're kind of assumed to know that we are the ones that are assumed to know everything about, the body and about the philosophy and about this, that, or the other thing.
I think it's a missed opportunity to see a human being that's present in front of you when you assume you know anything. I mean, here's the reality. I have a shit ton of degrees. I don't think I know anything. And the more I've studied, the more humbled I've become. I still have a long way to go, but it's a process where it's like, I mean, I have more concepts of different ways to meet people through a broader spectrum of education. But the more that I've learned, the more I realize that a human being is an emergent, complex, we can say system or being, that the only way I can truly meet them is to step into the unknown and meet them where they are, which is, one of the aspects of an emergent structure is that it's a surprise. And so if I'm not surprised, if I'm in this state of knowing, which has a rigidity to it, then I can't actually meet someone. And it's taken, just personally, it's taken me a long time to get to that point where I can, degrees, certifications aside, is that I trust in that I have accumulated capacities and ways to meet people. But once we're meeting, and the dance that we have when meeting, it takes a continuous practice of not knowing, of not assuming that I have any, and letting go of agenda, and assuming that I have the right answer, because I don't.
Yeah.
And it's so well said, because I think what Scott says there, if we think we know, we miss the chance to meet a person, and then we stop asking the questions.
Yeah.
Of like, tell me more. Let me understand it more fully. And then that kills the conversation and the relationship.
Yeah, those are really beautiful answers, Scott. And so now just to kind of, to focus on an example that every yoga teacher who's listening/watching this will have had, which is, after class, a student comes up and asks about an ailment or a disease or, something that they have that they're afflicted by. And then asks for some recommendations. And we've all been in a situation, I'm sure, where we feel pressed to, or we feel like we should have the answer to that, or we feel somehow that we're failing by not having an answer to that. So what are some best practices? Like if we just get down to kind of the question of like ethical responsibility about what we do in this kind of a situation. What is our ethical responsibility in these kinds of interactions post-class? When is it appropriate to refer a student, and how do we know?
Well, I mean, I think it's different internationally. That in the U.S., for one thing, I just want to say that there's liability. There's more of a suing culture, a lawsuit culture, which may have a different kind of pressure than, let's say, in Europe, where there's perhaps less of that. But, it doesn't mean you can't meet someone just because you don't know. I think it's more than okay to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But can we explore that together? And simply responding with a question that directs them inward is safe for you, and it allows them the opportunity to actually start to unmask or uncover what it is they're seeking. I mean, I often in trainings don't always answer questions. I'm listening to what is the question. I mean, I'm respectful.
I just visualize you sitting there, just not non-responsive when the question comes.
I nod. I say that's a great question because it is the question that it begins the journey, and I also am listening for what is the question underneath the question. Are they looking for validation? Are they looking for me to return a question so they can answer it themselves? Which I feel like is often the case, but they may not always know it. So, there are some really great. You can Google about different styles of asking questions, and and there's trainings on and basic therapeutic approaches and responding with questions, which I think is a really good standard practice to have, and to say I don't know.
Yeah, and I really like your answer when you started with when you were saying, like I don't know, but let's learn about this together, because it then, it shows that the learning process as a teacher continues in relationship with your students, and what you're presented with when a student with unique capacities comes into your classroom. So I really like that, as using that as an opportunity to kind of learn together in relationship, and from a place of not knowing. So Ellie, what do you think about that sort of situation that we all kind of encounter with the student coming up to us at the end of class and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the way I feel about ethics and I'm not a governing body, I'm not a religion of sorts, and to me it is so somebody's personal relationship to their own integrity, and just as a base note, just tell the truth. Yeah. You're okay, just tell the truth, and it's gonna be all right. If you know, answer. If you don't pretend you do, and then we don't need to get complicated. But I think if ethics just gets paused for a moment and we go back to the integrity of someone's own heart and their own relationship to their higher intelligence, and we start to run it more off integrity than ethics, then again, ethics are usually imposed on us from others. Integrity is usually referred and built from within. And I also don't mean to diminish, there's epic amounts of yoga teachers with more education and more institutionally and environmentally learned information out there that might know so much more. But to me, what I've found is that usually when somebody comes up with an affliction or a problem or they want advice, that's so not what they're looking for. They're looking to be seen and just want to make sure I know their name and that like they've been coming to class for a bit and that there's a relationship. And often they'll come with a problem, but I think the deeper need is like, hey, you see me, we're in this together, right? You've been noticing I've been in class every week. Yeah, my name's Bonnie, right? Whatever is the case. And so I think sometimes they're asking for help, but I think the deeper ask is usually, you see me, yeah?
Yeah. Wow. What a great answer. And I love that. I love that contrast between ethics and integrity. I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it like that. And that's a really beautiful way of sort of approaching, the internal versus externally imposed kind of theme that I think we're working with. So now I want to segue into something a little bit different, or just a little bit of a different topic, but something that I think is sort of in tune with what we're talking about, because the question of alignment and the question of adjustments are all sort of why do we do it? Well, we assume that alignment has something to do with healing, or something to do with the appropriate way to do yoga, and that appropriate way is in the service of some kind of healing process. At least that seems to be the kind of subtext, right? So I just want to ask the basic question, what is alignment, and how should we think about alignment?
I can.
Yeah, smart, Scott, go for it.
I think one thing to look at, because alignment is also associated typically with cue, giving a cue, and so if I can talk about all of that, I will take this opportunity. Is that I personally don't feel that there is any universal alignment, cue, and or adjustment, and that's something I feel very true for me, at least. That it goes back to recognizing the complexity, dynamics within them, that there is no particular universality, but there are ways to meet each individual. And so when we think about alignment, if I go back to that definition of healing, as there's some type of misalignment in the capacity to experience myself in my wholeness. So alignment in any capacity that we might look at is supporting someone back into relationship. So if I'm giving in
Scott,
alignment,
I'm gonna have you stop right there because I think we went offline for about the whole length of what you were just saying. So
okay.
will you just and now we're back in. So will you just repeat? Will you just say what you said again? Because it was really great.
Sure.
Sorry, I know that's
no. That's quite all right. That I was talking about that I'm going to sort of group the conversation or the topic of alignment with assist and cues of alignment. And to just say from my personal experience, I don't believe there's any universalized alignment cue or adjustment. And that's because I really want to go back to that recognizing the dynamic complication, or not complications, but the dynamics of human beings, and that we are all different in the way that we arrive. And so giving one universal cue may not necessarily meet everyone that's there. And then with that same idea in terms of a universal adjust or assist, if we go back to that definition I was saying about healing as the alignment or healing, that in moments where we are in healing, it's the process of a misalignment of experiencing myself in my wholeness back into the alignment of being able to sense, feel, experience myself in that wholeness. So in terms of being a facilitator, a yoga facilitator, I would say a alignment cue or an alignment assist would be about helping someone come more into relationship to themselves or into the ground or into the transpersonal experience. So that's how I see sort of alignment, is supporting someone back into relationship, as alignment denotes a relational capacity or relational component.
Right.
Conversation.
So then what would be the wrong way to work with alignment cues?
I don't know if I want to say the word wrong.
What would be less in line with cultivating a relationship with oneself?
Well, let's take, for example, if I were just to move everyone's femurs back into the socket in downward dog, which, I don't know, feels good for me sometimes, for sure. So that's why I don't want to use the word wrong. But if I just pull it back without being in relationship, sort of in dialogue through that whole process, I'm missing an opportunity to be with a human being, as we mentioned before, and getting continuous feedback of what this individual needs in order to be continuously met and supported in that growing relationship.
Beautiful answer. Okay, Ali, what do you think about alignment?
Yeah, these are such subjective and personal questions. It's so subtle because, as we know with yoga, we're dealing with so many variant densities of the body, from the causal to the subtle to the mental to the energetic to the physical. And so we can say there's some things that are more aligned in the skeletal and muscular system, but it starts to get way trickier in the mental and emotional system. And I think why this question of alignment and healing is so important together is because it's really one's own exploration to how they want to feel, rather than trying to constantly convey a right or wrong way to do things. It's always right to take the head of your thigh bones back. It's always right to, I think when it's cued poorly by a teacher, it's a teacher telling somebody how to feel. Do this and now feel that. When it's constantly telling somebody how to feel, they miss the chance to go on this whole eternal long journey of realizing it's what we align with that we become. So it's not really, to me, about what's good or bad alignment. It's what we align to that we start to match the rhythm of. And for me, even though I'm not trained as a musician, a real part of my life, and so everything kind of gets run through that analogy and that metaphor of music and dance, where I really know when a C note is in tune. I really know when a rhythm has a nice amount of bass and treble to it. And I'm starting to even feel my body and nervous system and mind and heart more like music. I can feel when it's aligned the same way I can feel when an instrument's in tune. But it's such a personal journey that somebody has to go on based off of what they behold. You know, I've been really loving this notion of we become the God we worship, or replace that word with whatever you want, but we become that which we give ourselves to, and we'll align with it. So it's less about what's good or bad alignment, and to me, what am I aligning myself with that I'll start to match and shape myself towards.
And so to take that a little further, then there might be a kind of underlying pretense towards notions of perfection that are probably less than fruitful, right? In the idea of a kind of universal alignment that needs to be, you know, universally applied to every student. So like what, you know, taking that sort of idea of like aligning to what, you know, what is that encouraging us to align to? It seems to be encouraging us to align with some sort of, you know, arbitrary universality that plays into notions of perfection that might be ultimately, you know, not fruitful.
It's right. If it's not as much, if for sure it's important the actions we take, but if it's what we do and how we do it, it didn't matter how much inner and outer spiral or primary and secondary action of the legs I did from self-hatred. It didn't matter.
That's a really great answer. I wish let's tweet that. So actually, I want to ask you both. I know the answer to you, Scott, but I'll have you answer it anyway. But do you adjust?
I mean, I'm a manual therapist, so I have my hands on people all the time.
Right.
And but it's a dialogue.
Yeah.
That it's sort of what I mentioned before, that I'm listening. It's a deep listening. I'm constantly working towards meeting them. And something I appreciate I appreciate everything Ali ever says, but one of the pieces I really appreciate is that sense of when when the alignment, I love the music analogy, when the notes feel like they're perfectly in tune with each other, there's that embodied sense of what connection, relationship feels like, which can give you some information to support other people. Like, you know, when you feel that alignment, that connection come in through your hands or through someone's practice, it's palpable. That doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily say, hey, that's your relationship or that's your alignment, but it is. I do believe that it is palpable when that comes together. So, yeah, I mean, yes, I do manual work, and I don't really like that word particularly manual, but it denotes certainly the field of study that I trained in.
Okay. So, Ali, how do you feel about adjustments?
Oh, okay, I'm going to be super honest again.
Be super honest.
I only adjust people I really know and really love.
Okay.
And I used to adjust a lot more.
Last time I was in your class, thanks
And
for that adjustment.
I used to adjust a lot more, and quite honestly, it was usually coming from a place where I just kind of wanted them to like me, and I knew that giving a good head rub in Shavasana would take care of that.
Yeah.
And then the more
So true.
And then the more I take, and I love teachers that adjust. That is not I'm not putting that on anyone else. That was my shtick. Great teachers that know how to adjust is amazing. But what I would find is usually when I would teach and adjust, I would be way more tired at the end. It would be too much of an energy exchange for me. And so when I took that out, I also realized I could just lead and let them have their own experience. And then I would have more energy afterwards. And I love a good adjustment. I love to be touched. But what I also find now is in this current landscape, I think it's safer not to unless you have a real relationship to people. There's a lot of things loaded into touch. But go ahead.
Yeah, definitely.
I do want to give a shout out for touch.
I love touch. Shout out.
Hey, touch. I mean, developmentally speaking, touch is one of the first ways we experience ourself. That and it is a deep way in which we can feel, as Ali even said before, seen and met. And so if the intentionality is that I'm even in the assist, it's to say, hey, I am here with you. I see you. I feel you. I experience you. Then that's pretty fucking rad. Mm-hmm. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah. You certainly are. This is a safe space. So okay, so we have one more question, and then I just want to tell everybody who's watching that, or remind everyone that if you have a question, I'm not seeing any questions yet in the comments. So if you have a question for Ali and Scott, please put those in the comments now, so that when I look to the comments in a second, I can ask them a question or two, and we can get a kind of exchange going with those of you who are showing up live. But our last question is, from your perspective, what makes a yoga class or a studio a place where healing can occur? Ali, do you want to start?
Yeah, that's so great. I'll go from the studio place first, just because I've worked in a lot of them for a number of years, and the ones I've found were the most healing spaces were the ones that, again, I'm just going to keep saying it, were in the most integrity with the practice, where the management team and the way they were respecting teachers and the payment structure and the relationships between the business owners, all of that was just running with a respect to the practice rather than counter to practice, because you can feel it. You can walk into a space that is more interested in the currency of money than the currency of prana, and you can feel it. Not saying that making money is not vital to running a business, but the studios I've been in where real relationships have been formed and communities have been formed and teachers have evolved in their practices and students feel really seen, they're run in alignment to and respect of the teachings and the practice and self-accountability and self-respect and a field of love. And I'd say the same thing with a class. Like, I'm such a deep believer in primary intent and the prayers we set of even if one class is a little disjointed and out of harmony, in the long spectrum of somebody's career, if they've got a really solid intention and a good prayer set to let their voice and their eyes and their hands and their teachings be in service to love, mm-hmm. It'll take care of itself. It's so prayer and intent based for me. And then, cover the basics, like know what you're doing and have good information, like be good, and have that seed of intent carry you through.
So for you personally, how do you cultivate that prayer and intent? I mean, just practically speaking, do you, at the beginning of your class, take a minute, or is it the beginning of the day? Like, how do you ground yourself in that prayer and intent?
Maybe some newer teachers or some experienced teachers can relate to this. And I remember hearing this right at the start of my career, that if you want to ruin your practice, become a teacher. And,
yeah, exactly.
I think starting out, the number of classes some of us had to take just to cover the bills, the last thing I would want to do would be on my mat. And so that's not sustainable. And so for me, having my practice and my commitment to my practice and my connection and my clarity and my prana being first and foremost, and not letting that waver based off of any of my good reasons or sabotage techniques is primary. If I'm going into class after class and client after client and telling them to do what I'm not, I'm out.
Yeah.
And so again, integrity. And then I try to keep it real and light in the way that I know people are going through big stuff, and I know as a species and a culture and a community, we're going through big stuff. And if we have places that we get to let go and be held and be in community and get some reprieve and to grieve, then I'd love to hold a space for that. So I think that is the container. Even in just, again, the way I would start my class or feel about what I'm walking into in a space, that I really believe that we can do so much inside of the practice individually and collectively. And so a lot of it is just having faith in the practice, to be honest.
Yeah.
That it's got an intelligence and it's got an order.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful answer. So what about you, Scott? Did you forget the question?
No.
What makes a yoga class or a studio a place where healing can occur?
I remember, Jacob. I was thinking about a story or a memory that I had of a friend of mine who owned a studio in New York, and I would take her class all the time. And I just remember this gentleman coming up to her after class with tears in his eyes, and he said to her, "You saved my life." Mm. And it was so moving, and still is moving for me to think about. And he went into the details of his divorce, and that he felt so alone, and he had talked about suicidal ideations, and that coming here gave him a sense of meaning. And I can't say enough about what community or Kula does for giving us a sense of place to be, and that container, that safe space to be with what is here allows that healing process to happen. And so, a facilitator or a studio that can really hold the space for that, and to honor everyone who comes in, and to meet them and to see them, it's so massive. And just to build that sense of community, to recognize that we're coming to a class and that there are people to my right and there are people to my left. I've certainly gone to classes with my blinders on, and then I just leave, and I don't even know who was next to me. Might have been Madonna for all I know. And
probably not, though.
Maybe. Probably not. But I wouldn't know. I mean, and that's and the difference between that and actually being able to recognize. I mean, I love this idea that the social ecology builds the resilience. Mm-hmm. That the way in which we create the atmosphere, the environment, actually allows for the container for people to breathe through, to move through, to transition, to realign what has been pained or suppressed. And so there's a great study called the Dodo study, a psychological study, and it looked at a bunch of different schools of psychology, all the different techniques, and they were trying to figure out what's the best technique to help people heal, or to heal people. And what they came out of it is it's not about the technique, maybe about 20% technique, and 80% of why people return to therapy, and I believe this to be the same for classes, is that the facility and the practitioner have a sense of presence, that they're able to hold space, that there's a vulnerability that they exhibit, and a bravery of standing up and being there in that vulnerability. And the willingness to see people in their wholeness. I mean, these fundamental features or elements, I feel like, are embedded in what I would consider yoga. Yeah. And so when Ali says trust the practice, when we really dive into ourselves and into the practice of yoga, then as facilitators, we can't help but be that, to create the fertile ground for healing.
Wow. Yeah, really well said. You both have been giving really beautiful answers and incredible wisdom and insight, and I think it's all quite actionable and educational for the people listening. So I'm going to turn now to the questions that we have. And again, if you do have questions that you haven't asked yet, please feel free to share, and we'll try to get around to all of them. So this is from Liz Bueller-Walker. Hi, Liz. This conversation has been so amazing. What are the practices you each do to stay in your integrity? And what are the experiences/sensations you have that tell you you have strayed from your integrity? Ali, do you want to answer that?
Question. So my body tells me right away I'll get a rash, or I'll get a boil, or I'll get anxiety. Anxiety is my number one marker.
You get a
and
boil?
For a long time I used to. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
That was a long time. Boils were earlier, and then it would just always be a rash. But I always had this story that I was an anxious person, And then I started to really pull apart anxious sensations and realize it was always my body telling me when I wasn't being totally honest. I was avoiding conflict. There was something in my relational field that was off. And so my body has been quite expressive. And maybe that's true for Liz. But my regular practices for me, I grew up in such a way where the truth didn't have much for me because I usually tell the truth and get in trouble. What happened is that was kind of the parenting cycle I was in. And it wasn't until I was adult where I had to realize that the truth had more for me than just getting in trouble. And so I learned really skillful ways of avoiding conflict and manipulating and not saying what I felt, but what somebody wanted to hear as a way of, being what I thought was good relationship. And so I had to go through with good coaches and good therapy to just tell the truth and honor what I felt and what was my inner voice as a way of coming into integrity. And then when I did a lot of the good cleanup of just, being okay with conscious conflict and being okay in my voice and my truth and not worrying so much about how somebody would see me because of how I felt, then the little ways that I would get out of integrity would get cleaned up so fast. And so the daily practices are usually a body, mind, and heart scan of like, we good, we off, we playing a game we want to play to rules that we've set, just me and my own heart. And then clean up as I go, like the same way to keep a tidy home, like don't do it every week, do it every little moment you see something out of whack. Clean it up as you go so that when you go to clean up and tell the truth and get into integrity, it's not 20 pounds you have to lose and 15 relationships you got to clean up. They're little incremental steps that are easier on the heart.
Great answer. Scott, how do you know when you're straying from integrity?
I get a little voice in me that calls me an asshole, which is repeated by my friends. So thank you, dear friends that are on this call right now. Yeah, I mean, relationships are mirrors. And I'm not joking in the sense that like my friends are mirroring back to me. The way that things are happening in my environment are a mirror back as to what is happening in my internal environment. That if it feels like it's in flow, then I can experience that same alignment inside. And when things feel yucky, it's a very descriptive word, when things feel tight and bound and in a disorganization and in my life, then it's a mirror back to what is not aligned in me. How am I not an expression of what it feels like the rightness? And so the practices are recognizing not only, in addition to that sense within me, also what's happening in my environment and what is being mirrored in my relationships.
So Scott, this is a question for you from Adrienne Rabina. Hi, Adrienne.
Hey,
Scott, will you speak more to how the teacher holds the container? Maybe some examples?
Yeah. So I think a really beautiful example of holding the container is feeling one's own anchor as themselves as an anchor, that they can, that whatever is happening in the room, they can still be in themselves, regulating, being present, and in relation to the other people in the room. I think another way to hold the container in a way is let's say if I'm walking into a room, the first thing I do in teaching a class is recognizing that there are other human beings coming together. Mm-hmm. And the next piece of that is, where are people already in their strength? Where are people already in their health? Where are people already in their fulfilling their potential? So I'm not walking in looking for injuries. I'm not walking in and looking where I can fix people. So I might recognize other elements of where there are places that could be more in relation to the places that are in flow, are in support. But holding the container means that I'm recognizing that all these people in their dynamic, complex systemness are with me, and I'm with them, and that I'm also being present with where they are in health. And I think for me, those two practices I keep coming back to are ways in which people feel held. Like if I walk into a room and I feel a teacher already sort of judging my practice, I don't feel held. I feel sort of attacked. And that doesn't lead me to feel safe enough to go into this inward journey as a process of healing.
Yeah. Ellie, do you have any thoughts on that question about, how to hold space? Because I think it is a good question, because we do we're like, I just want to hold space, create a container, but we don't often express sort of like what's involved in that process. So from you, in your practice of teaching, what does that look like for you?
Okay, so super practically speaking, one of the best ways to create the container is don't be the leak in it. And so if
Good answer.
if the teacher's making it all about them through their self-analysis and their self-judgment, and I'm not doing it right, like we'll feel the moment we're in a teacher's room that's just in their own process about how they're doing, rather than like what they're here to do. And so don't make it about yourself. That's probably the most practical thing I could say. And one thing that gets glitchy for people when they're holding the space is they're usually holding the space for the realm that they feel comfortable in, where it's gonna include people's discomfort and their emotion, and where they don't like you and they leave and they want to not do what you're saying. But to hold the space says whatever arises, I'm down for. I'm down to look at it. I'm down to process it. I can hold it. It's not just holding the container for what the teacher wants to see occur.
Right.
And so, in the 3-step process of yoga, know your truth, trust the process, release the results, and that release the expectation of the results. And so get the container in such a way that it's going to get glitchy. This is a practice that's meant to churn. It's not here for our comfort. It's not here for us to like it. So if you're holding the space, you're down for what arises, and you set the deepest anchor. And when it gets stormy, you get settled.
Yeah. Can I add to that?
Yeah, of course.
I'm inspired by Alice. I've been talking in this process of how do we operationalize something that's kind of esoteric or, amorphous of holding space. One of the things I find helpful to recognize is that relationships happen in the space. And so when we talk about holding the space, we're holding the clarity of the relationship. And the way in which we actually physically hold the space, if I'm intrusive in how I am holding the space, if it feels claustrophobic, that is how the relationship is going to be felt. If I'm vacant, if I'm totally unpresent and I'm wandering through and I'm checking the time, I'm not containing the relationship that's held in the space. So it can actually become extremely practical in the tangible way in which I am holding the space. Is it narrow? Is it wide? Is it expansive? Does it feel like a bubble? Does it feel like more of a direct hallway to each person? We can actually begin to operationalize it in ways that might meet the individual in a specific way or the group.
So we have a very, a more kind of, I would say basic question, but a question regarding, becoming a teacher. So what advice would you give to practitioners that are feeling the urge to join the conversation in the seat of the teacher?
Do it.
So I'll do this just because Scott, one of my favorite 200-hour programs out there is what Scott and Tara Judell, they lead an embodied flow teacher training. He can't say it or else I can. Find great teachers that you believe in their embodiment, where you watch them long enough that you believe in how they're carrying themselves, personally, professionally, relationally, financially, so that you start to from somewhere that has a huge runway for you. And I get the desire to go through New York City trucks. I get the desire to go through training your trainings fast, but to the person asking the question, a 200-hour is a tip of an iceberg, or it's leading middle school, not active. But then you decide after middle school, after high school, do I want to go to college? Do I want to travel? Do I want to go into trades? So if you do a tour, it gives you enough information to then go see if you want to get into the therapeutics of it or the restoratives, the philosophy and the theoretics. 200-hour with teachers that you really respect, beautiful jumping off place to not only your 500-hour, but it's so important now because we have so many people and yoga is so broad to find something you want to specialize in and become really skillful at it. It's not as much the industry for new teachers to get in and be as broad. You want to get really good and skillful at something that you care a lot about. So I would say find great teachers who you respect their embodiment, not just what they have to say, but how they embody what they have to say.
Great answer. Good advice. Scott, do you have any thoughts on that you want to share? Besides doing your training?
There are a lot of good trainings. So the question is how does one begin the process, or should they?
I think it's sort of like how do they move? What advice would you give to practitioners that are? This is from Megan Ashforth, by the way. I just wanted to see her.
Hey, Megan.
Her. What advice would you give to practitioners that are feeling the urge to join the conversation in the seat of the teacher?
I would turn it back like I typically do and ask the question, what is inspiring you to take this next step? And what do you imagine that this next step will do for you? Because, I think it can be really popular to go do a 200-hour, like, I have a month off from work. I'm going to go do a 200-hour, which is cool too. But it's also, what is your intentionality? The way in which you clarify your intentions will set the ground for how you enter into that immersive experience. And what you get from it. Is it really about like a deep dive into yoga? Is it about you transitioning or adding on to your practice and beginning to transmit it and facilitate it out into the world? I love what Joseph Campbell says. Sorry. I love what Joseph Campbell says about embodiment, and that he says the last stage of embodiment is to offer it out. And that is, why I love teaching is partly that, is that it is part of one's own process. It could be one's part of healing or one's process of growth, is that to share it, to offer it. And even if you don't, quote unquote, become a teacher where you're teaching 5 classes a week or 10 privates, to be able to offer this embodied experience to others is part, to just go back, is part of our own healing process.
If I could just add one thing, because I know the person asking the questions, I want it to actually be a response to what she's asking. The only way I'll ever learn how to do something is by doing it. And I think teachers can get caught in a lot of I don't know enough, because the more they learn, the more it shows how little they know. And so then we put off teaching to a point of perfection. Yeah. But what I can say, and I started teaching when I was 24, and so I'm like tens of thousands of hours by now, but I have to say, like, thousands of those hours were terrible. Terrible. That's like thousands of hours. People, I should just give them their money back. But it's just like learning any language or learning an instrument. It's only through the act that we'll then learn that feedback loop of we're not allowed to learn anymore. We're not allowed to make mistakes anymore, and to do like oh, I messed up and I got a course correct. Perfectionist is slaughtering us. So I think to that particular question, just go do it and learn as you go.
Yeah. So we have a kind of follow-up question from Adrienne, and I think that will probably be the last question that we'll take for today. She says, do we? This was based on the question before that she had asked about holding space in the container, and she asks, Do we want to release attachment to the results? Can you clarify? Question, what results are you hoping for when you teach yoga? Essentially, how do you know you're doing your job well?
Great.
It's a great follow-up.
That was so that was to the question of know your truth, trust the process, release expectations of the results. Yeah. So of course, you want to find your markers. You want to make sure students are coming back. You want to make sure the feedback is aligned with what you're putting out there. But, there's a timeline of things. Sometimes we have to give ourselves a chance to learn and grow into something. And if the expectation of our result is that I'm instantly good at it through my own eyes, or that I'm instantly a success on social media, or whatever is the case, usually we obsess on the results and we forget the first two. Remember, it was an equation. Know your truth and trust the process. I know I'm showing up on my mat. I know I'm setting good prayer. I know I'm skillfully educating myself. And then wait for a second, just pause a beat for the field to connect and catch up with you. Because sometimes the results we see happen later down the road, or they happen in a way we could never understand, of the way we touch somebody or reflect with something or someone. And so it doesn't mean don't care. It means care so deeply you trust it to unfold.
Yeah, beautiful. I love, thank you, I love that. Something that always helps me, which Tara Jadel says over and over again, is I'm holding the big picture, the long haul picture, that it's not just about this moment for this person. It is, I'm there with this person, but to know that this moment might not feel like that moment that is healing for them.
Yeah.
And to trust that you are building the support for them and being there continuous for the process. And we can't always recognize it in every moment that they're in process. I mean, the reality is we're constantly in process. We're not ever not in process unless we try to create a suppression or to sort of bundle it up, which only has one long-term effect, which is not great. So we are constantly in process, and to trust, as Ali is saying, that to hold the long picture, to hold the long concept, that it will be the ride that it will be. And, maybe one day they'll come to you and they'll be like, yes, I feel this. I feel I've come home. And that moment is awesome, and I would say savor it. Write it down, keep it in a box, because there will be a lot of days where that does not happen. But that doesn't mean that it's not happening. It just isn't the big yeehaw, the big self-realization of arriving.
Yeah. Wow.
Great.
Well, this has been such a fascinating and beautiful conversation. Thank you so much, Ali Bogard and Scott Lyons, for sharing your wisdom and insight. Before we close the conversation, I just wanted to give you both an opportunity to share a little bit about the work that you're doing, where people can find you, if you have any sort of projects coming up that you want to let people know about. Do you want to start, Ali?
Yeah, sure. I'm in New York, but you can just find anything I do on allybogard.com. And I just want to say quickly, Jacob, these are such important conversations for our industry right now. So I really appreciate that for you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And what about you, Scott?
Yeah, I thank you, Jacob. It's really great to have the space to be in dialogue about this, and I'm a big fan of your podcast, so it's really been helpful. For those who haven't checked it out, start listening. It is really quite stellar work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm in New York sometimes, in private practice sometimes, and then the rest of the time I'm traveling and teaching. You can find me on my website, www. I assume that's actually, everyone knows that.
HTTP : /
It's drdrscottlyons.com, or you can check us out embodiedflow.com as well.
Embodied Flow. And he came up with that name before we came up with Embodied Philosophy, so don't worry, he didn't steal it from us.
I bet it was simultaneous.
It was. It was in the air. It was the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
All right. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and do, connect with these two fantastic teachers and wisdom holders, if you feel like you could learn more from them, which of course you could. So seek them out at ellybogard.com and drscottlyons.com. Both of those beginning with www, as Scott said. Thanks so much, everybody. And again, if you are available, please tune in tomorrow at Thursday. Tomorrow is Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Isa Gucciardi's talk, Depth Hypnosis Perspectives on Trauma for Yoga Teachers. You can find out more about that at embodiedphilosophy.com/yoga seminar. So again, thank you to Ali and Scott, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Scott. Lots of love.
Thank you. Bye, Ali.